بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم والصلاة والسلام على نبينا Muhammad wa ala alihi wa ashabihi ajma'in amma ba'd. Continuing the station of huzun, sorrow, Abu Ismail al-Harawi rahimahullah ta'ala says الدرجة الثانية حزن أهل الإرادة وهو حزن على تعلق القلب بالتفرقة وعلى اشتغال النفس عن الشهود وعلى التسلي عن الحزن. This is the second level of huzun, of sorrow, that Abu Ismail is promoting as being a station that can bring someone closer to Allah, or someone can worship Allah through this emotion. And just kind of jog our memories, last week Ibn Qayyim, we went over how Ibn Qayyim rahmatullah alayhi says that this is not really a station. Nowhere in the Quran or the Sunnah or the life of the Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam is huzun, is sorrow, used to as a spiritual experience. But just to kind of understand the concepts and the ideas here, some of which are accurate, are fair, and others which we won't really promote or we won't really accept. So here he says the second level is huzun ala ta'alluq al-qalb bit-tafriqa, when the heart becomes divided because it's not focused on one particular vision. And as Muslims, obviously, we're going to say that worshipping Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, living a life that is centered around Allah, one of the benefits of that is that it unifies the heart. It synchronizes the heart with the rest of the body, where the heart is no longer struggling to understand its wants. We've all seen the sitcoms and the soap operas and whatnot, where a guy or a girl likes more than one person, or she's married and she falls in love with another guy, and it's just this major struggle and how she's going to choose. That really drains a person and it strains them. And when a person is in such a situation, well, how are they going to focus on worshiping Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala when their heart is so divided between two other things? So one person, Abu Ismail is promoting here, saying that a person should be sad when their heart isn't unified in the presence or under the presence of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And what results therein is that the heart, the mind, and the body is kind of divided as well. So when you look at the verse, for example, أَلَا بِذِكْرِ اللَّهِ تَطْمَئِنُّ الْقُلُوبِ, indeed, in the remembrance of Allah do hearts find rest. One of the elements of this verse and what it's saying, and the remembrance of Allah, is that it synchronizes the mind, the body, and the heart. Right? Mind, body, and soul. Soul being the heart. Right? And if the heart is attached to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and if that attachment becomes strong enough, what eventually happens, or what starts happening, is that the mind is also now focused on Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The body will then enact that. It will manifest through it. If my goal is to please Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and that is, my heart has become attached to that, then I'm going to start praying. If my heart is attached to Allah, I'm going to think of how I can become closer to Him. And of course, the stronger the attachment is, the stronger the person's implementation of that attachment is going to be. But the idea here is that the heart, the mind, and the body become synchronized under one vision, the vision of pleasing Allah, the vision of paradise. But if someone is following their desires, right, as Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, أو كظلمات في بحر لجي يغشاه موج من فوقه موج من فوقه سحاب, right? ظلمات بعضها فوق بعض. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, just to kind of paraphrase here so we don't get in too long of a tangent, in this verse Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is giving an example of a disbeliever, their state. How do they feel? And in this one, it's someone who seems to have been completely disconnected or very much disconnected from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, where their disbelief has disconnected them from Allah. Likewise, their actions, their behaviors, their practices, their routine, their lifestyle has also further distanced themselves from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And Allah gives the situation that it's as if that person is under the darkness of night, under the darkness of the ocean, in the deep ocean, to the extent that if the person were to extend his arm or her arm, they can barely see it. That is the darkness. Now, when you think of waves, waves can play with a person. A person who's in a body of water and there are waves, they are almost helpless, right? And such is the situation of a person who has become disconnected from Allah. It's waves above waves, right? And the person has, no way to escape that. It's darkness upon darkness. Why? The waves perhaps represent the person's desires. One desire comes, takes him a certain way. Another desire comes another way, and just it's up and down and back and forth, right? Helplessly, because desires. That's what desires are. In the Arabic language, the word qalb, which means heart, it comes from the verb taqallub, which means to kind of flip over and to rotate, right? Because the heart is exactly like that. One day, a person can go through multiple emotions in a single hour. Right? They could be happy and laugh, and then all of a sudden they get news and they're mad at their, or their child does something, they're mad, and then they remember something in the past, they become sad, they start grieving, and that's how the heart is. Right? So if a person is following desires, and desires aren't something, desires equate to pleasure seeking. And pleasures, today I feel like eating a steak. Tomorrow I'm not going to feel like eating a steak, I want something else. Right? But if you only have a supply of steak, as high quality as it might be and how good it might be, the body can't continue to have the same thing. So it keeps flipping and turning. So when a person is living a lifestyle that's seeking, that is primarily revolving around pleasure, seeking pleasure, enjoying pleasure, this is what happens to the person. It creates this division, the heart, it becomes divided between so many things. I like this, but I like that, and I can't have both. What do I do now? I want this and I want that, I can't have both. What do I do now? So even if you obtain one, you lost the other. Right? And as Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in Surah Tawbah about the people with money, سَنُعَذِّبُهُمْ مَرَّتَيْنِ ثُمَّ يَرَدُّونَ إِلَىٰ عَذَابٍ غَلِيظٍ. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says that He's going to make that money, that wealth that they have, a source of punishment for them. Right? How so? Twice. Two types of punishment. Why? And these are people who are completely materialistic. These are people who are willing to sell Allah if they can. If they can make money off of the name of Allah, they will. Right? And there are so many people like that. Don't be shocked. Right? Don't be shocked. Those who say, Wallah man, I bought this item for this amount. Wallah, I swear to God, I'm barely making any profit. They're using Allah's name to sell their products. Right? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says that their money will be a source of grief for them. How so? Because while as they are pursuing money, getting money, right, it creates a type of stress and sorrow. Will I be able to achieve? Will I be able to accomplish? Right? Someone starts a business. It creates an amount of grief. Why? Because I'm concerned. Will this business flourish? Or am I going to lose my money? And let's say it's successful. They're always afraid over what can possibly happen to it. What if the stock market crashes? What if my products become irrelevant? They're always concerned. And then if they lose any of that money, they grieve over the loss of that money. And everyone will lose their money in this life or when they pass away. So when a person becomes overly attached to money, to where money is pretty much their God, they work and they live for money, for the attainment of money, for gaining money, right? This is what happens to the person. Their heart, if they have it, they're grieving over possibly losing it, or what can happen to it, or spending it. If they don't have it, they're grieving over what? Not having it. So their heart is between grief and grief and grief. So for believers who are seeking Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, they grieve over time or over moments where their heart isn't synchronized with that goal of pleasing Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The second element of this level is حزن على اشتغال النفس عن الشهود, is grieving over being preoccupied from the remembrance of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, or witnessing Allah in the world around us. The term shuhud, which we've been over before, shuhud is referring to when we observe Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, or we see and feel Allah's presence, not His physical presence, right? But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, when we see how, when what is around us reminds us of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, we grieve over the moments that we lost where we're not experiencing this. Or when we try and experience it, but it's not really budging. It's not sparking an emotional response, a spiritual experience. So when a person looks at the mountain, for example, we've spoken of how a mountain is a symbol of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and His capabilities, what He can do. Now, that might not happen for certain people. They might be looking at the mountain, but it just hasn't connected yet. They haven't reached that level where, or that amount of knowledge where they're able to see how this mountain represents Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. They should grieve over that. Or that at a certain moment, their mind or their heart isn't in the right place, and as they are observing the mountain, they say, well, it's just a mountain, it's not really, who cares, whatever. Sometimes we have those moments, that we have those days. Or sometimes we're so preoccupied with our lives that we forget that, hey, there's a beautiful mountain right there. You can look at and enjoy. Have a nice moment just looking at it, seeing the clouds above it and how the clouds create the shade over the mountain. Such a beautiful image. Sometimes our hearts are just not in the right place. So we grieve over those moments that we lost in experiencing Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in our everyday lives. The third element is حزن على التسلي عن الحزن. Now, this is when you get overly Sufi here. What Abu Ismail al-Harwi rahimahullah ta'ala is saying here is that when we grieve, right, a grievance or grief is a sign or the result of a person, let me put it this way, grieving is indicative of a person's irada, their will. When they want something, when they want to accomplish something, but they're incapable of, that's when the grieving comes in, right? I want this job so much. Now, as in the process of applying, you're not really grieving, right? You might be stressed, but you're not grieving. When does a person start grieving? When they don't get the job, right? And what does that mean? It means that they had a want, they had a will, they had a motivation to accomplish something. But when it didn't work, that's when the grieving comes in, right? So, according to Abu Ismail, this is where the spiritual element is, right? Grieving is a sign that the person, their heart is in the right place, but they're trying to achieve it and they're incapable. And therefore, if a person, that grief, the emotion of grief goes away, they start grieving over the passing of that grief, right? You guys say, oh, what? Right? Yeah, so this is when Sufism becomes a little bit too much, right? This is not the way it works, right? But do you understand the idea here? Is that grieving is a healthy sign of will, motivation, enthusiasm. When that enthusiasm and motivation is directed towards Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, now the person is trying to achieve that. They're trying, right? But because they feel like they haven't gotten there yet, they're grieving. Because they feel like they haven't accomplished it, they're grieving. So if that grief goes away, they start grieving because they lost that motivation. That motivation is gone. Why did they stop grieving? Well, one of two things. Because they accomplished it, they achieved it, or because the motivation died out. That makes sense? So they start grieving over the loss of the motivation. Now, Qayyim says this is too much. Right? Rather, what the Sharia is going to promote, what the Quran promotes, is that we don't grieve over this. Rather, we find a reason to apply farah, celebration. Maybe that's not the best word, but that's what's coming to my mind right now. A praiseworthy type of celebration. And that is celebrating Allah's bounties and His mercy. Right? So, rather than grieving over why, for example, I didn't get up for tahajjud. I wanted to get up for tahajjud. Right? I put my alarm clock on, and maybe even I woke up, but I snoozed when I went back to sleep, and then it was Fajr time. Right? Instead of grieving over that, rather what we do is we find a reason to celebrate Allah's mercy and bounty. How so? Well, we remember the hadith in which the Prophet ﷺ teaches us, even the Quran, the verses of the Quran in the hadith, that whoever has the intention to do a good deed, right, but doesn't do it, they get at least one reward. But if they had the intention to do it, but something else stopped them outside of their control stop them from doing it, right? What does Allah do? He gives them the entire reward for the intention, right? So we celebrate that, and that's not to say that we become lazy in trying to do night prayer. But things didn't work out, we don't sit there grieving. What's grief going to do for us? It's not going to strengthen us. It's not going to bring us closer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Rather, we find a reason to celebrate and say, oh Allah, look how bountiful you are, look how merciful you are, that even though I did not fulfill my intention, you are still rewarding me partially or entirely for that intention itself. Right? And what that does is it creates a type of optimism in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It creates a type of attachment and nearness to Allah where, how can I go wrong with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? It's impossible. I'm always at the advantage. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is always giving me the advantage. He's always giving me an A+ for my efforts, even if my efforts fall short. Right? It's not like other human beings. And the more you kind of realize that, the more you see it, the more it kind of connects you to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and makes you realize the realities of other human beings. Right? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is always ready to give me an A+, always ready to, give me the cheat sheet, as they say, always ready to make my wrong answers correct and just say it's okay, don't worry about it. Whereas when you deal with other human beings, it's simply not that case. So Ibn Qayyim rahmatullah alayh says that there's absolutely nothing to benefit for grieving over the loss of grief. It's too much. Now Ibn Ismail continues and says, وَلَيْسَتْ الخاصة من مقام الحزن في شيء لأن الحزن فقدان والخاصة أهل وجدان. Here he's saying that there is no khas above the experts when it comes to huzn. Why? Because grief is the result of that disconnect that I was mentioning before, and the above average, the experts, are never disconnected. They're always connected. That's what makes them experts in the first place. They're always connected. But Ibn Qayyim comments here, and he says that if what Abu Ismail rahimahullah ta'ala means here is that the experts don't intentionally try and enact grievances, they're not intentionally looking for a reason to grieve, then that is true. That is what he's saying is true. However, if what he means is that if what he means is that experts never grieve in the first place, then that's obviously not true, because it's part of human nature. Humans will always grieve. The Prophet ﷺ grieved. He grieved when the people of Ta'if kicked him out. He grieved when his son Ibrahim passed away. He grieved when Uhud occurred, and he grieved over other things. Finally, الدرجة الثالثة, the third level, التحزن للمعارضات دون الخواطر والمعارضات القصود واعتراضات الأحكام. The third level of huzn is first التحزن للمعارضات, and what is meant by that is when a person is in a good state, but something happens to where it changes that good state. Someone, we have this thing called what's it called? Iman highs, right? You know how you say, I'm in an emotional high? I'm in an Iman high, right? Spiritual high. Sometimes you go, for example, Umrah is a primary, Umrah and Hajj are primary examples of that. Someone who could care less about is not practicing, goes to Hajj and Umrah, mashallah, Even the celebrities of the Arab world, mashallah, they go and do Hajj and Umrah, oh man. They're all praying, and of course on Snapchat, showing everyone, hey, we're praying, right? They're all into it. It's a spiritual high. It's not fake, right? Sure, they're acting very immaturely in that regard, but it's not necessarily fake. They might be very much into what they're doing and worshiping Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. However, where was I going with this? That's going to change. So when a person's situation changes from a spiritual high to a spiritual low, we grieve over that. Right? When a person is in a situation where they have a freer schedule, there's more free time, so you're able to sleep more, and therefore you can get up for Qiyam al-Layl, or you have some extra hours to spare where you can go and listen to a lecture. That's a convenience, but that convenience isn't always there. Alhamdulillah, we have the privilege right now to utilize this time, but maybe in the next year or so, or the next few months, something else will come up where you no longer have that time, right? So we grieve over those changes. The second element is mu'aradat al-qusud, and what's meant by this is when a person's motivation shifts from towards Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to other things. And again, sometimes that's out of our hands. Sometimes, it's about the conveniences of life. If a person is overworked, where are they going to find time to worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? That's just a human reality. So when you go to places that the economy isn't as well, and a person has to work 16 hours to put a very small meal, a very small dinner on the table, where is this person going to find time to worship Allah and study, right? So our situations change from stability to unstable, from settled to unsettled, etc. So what happens as a result is that it also changes our enthusiasm, motivations. Right? When a person has more time, then they work towards, or they can use it to work towards Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. When I was in Jordan, I remember hearing this so often, that there's just no time to do anything. There's no time to do anything. I would hear this so often in conversations. And I said, let me think for a moment. If these people had more time, if they had free time, what would they be doing? And I'm certain what they would be doing is smoking the hookah, right? Playing cards, and watching TV. And that's the best case scenario. If they had more time, because that's what they do in their free time. And if they had more free time, that's what they're going to do. So it's a blessing from Allah. So it's a blessing from Allah that He's occupying their time with something that's praiseworthy, and that's working, making money for the family. Because if they weren't, they'd be falling into sin, right? Whereas look at the companions, for example. Because their free time was always employed for, used to get closer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, Allah gave them so much wealth. Here's all the wealth. Don't worry about money. Because when you don't worry about money, you're focused on me. You're doing salah. When a companion would pray all night, well, if he needed to work in the morning and work long hours and hard hours, where is he going to find the time to pray Qiyam al-Layl? Uthman radiallahu anhu used to recite the entire Quran every night in witr prayer. Yeah, every night. Right? Where did he find the time to do that? Because Allah gave him the wealth so that he doesn't need to work so hard. Right? So looking at making sure our intentions are in the right place can be a way of increasing the rizq, the provisions that come to us. It can be. Right? We can't make a law out of this where my intentions are good, why isn't Allah? No, it's not the way it works, but it could be. It could be that because a person's heart isn't in the right, isn't healthily motivated, right? Where if they had free time, they just waste it. Well, they're better off doing something that they're praiseworthy of if they do, and that's working and making money for the family and providing them. So we grieve over that. Also, we grieve when there are two possibilities, two things that we can do, and we don't know which one is more pleasing to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. I have two options here. I can, for example, go and help a friend out, or with this favor, or I can go help another friend out with that favor. I can't do both. And I want to do something for the sake of Allah, but I don't know which one's going to bring me more reward. For someone who's charged and fully motivated to worship Allah and get closer to Allah and reach higher levels of paradise, that's going to eat away at them. Right? Man, which one is it? Is this the right decision? Is this the wrong decision? So they grieve over that. However, there's a way of distinguishing. Right? There's a way of deciding which of the two is better. And there are two things that we can do. Number one, obvious one, is knowledge. The more knowledge a person has, the more they're able to decipher what is more pleasing to Allah and not. Right? And you'll start getting from knowledge. You start developing general rules or principles in deciding that. One, for example, is that helping someone else is always a better act of worship than something that only benefits yourself. So if it's salah, going to the masjid to pray Isha or going to a fundraiser to help poor person out, right? Which one is better? Obviously to help the poor people out, because now your good is extending to someone else, and that's more pleasing to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala than an act of worship that comes back to the self. So that's one way. The other way we can help decide and decipher is through reaching out to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, making dua. And making dua to Him, doing istighfar, expressing one's need for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and doing istikhara. You don't know which of the two is better? Pray istikhara. Now Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows. Make dua. Oh Allah, show me which one is more pleasing to you. Do istighfar. Because istighfar removes those, sometimes it's an obvious answer, but there's something I didn't catch that. We all have those moments where, oh my God, I didn't even realize that. It's right in front of me. And subhanAllah, sometimes it's because the sins that are on our backs that kind of blind us to that. So doing istighfar removes that. Ibn Taymiyyah rahmatullah alayh, whenever he is confused about a certain issue, whenever he doesn't feel like, I don't know what the evidence is pointing me to, Ibn Qayyim rahmatullah alayh says that he would go out and do istighfar 1,000 times, and by the time he's finished, he'll come back and say, it's become clear to me now. Why? Because he realizes that what's blinding us, what's making it more difficult to come to a correct conclusion is our own sins, right? And there's nothing demeaning about that. Some people say, "Oh, why would you say that?" And I'm not full of sins. No, we are. We're all full of sins, and that's part of healthy iman to acknowledge that. And that's what the companions would do. That's what the righteous scholars would do. This acceptance of our our accountability in our sins is healthy iman. It's what the spiritual leaders acknowledge and accepted. And finally, حزن على اعتراضات الأحكام, grieving over the contradictions of it's hard to translate. Contradictions of ahkam is laws or realities. I'm going to use realities here. And there are two possibilities here. Either the realities of the natural world, or the realities of qada and qadar, the qadar of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, where we are pursuing something. We want something, but Allah's qadar brings something else. Abu Ismail al-Harawi is saying that we grieve when that occurs. Why? Because our want was not coinciding with what Allah knew is better. So we grieve over the fact that we were pursuing the lesser of two goods, or something that was not in our best interest. I made a wrong choice here, right? Now this is very theoretical. This is very abstract. And Ibn Qayyim, as he mentioned before, you're not sad over that. You don't become sad over that. Rather, you become happy that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala cares so much about you that, He didn't give you what you wanted, but rather He gave you something that's even better than that. And finally, the realities of religion. When we think that this is the true opinion, the correct understanding, and we later find out that it's actually wrong. We grieve over that because time has passed where there was part of the religion that we didn't understand correctly, that we misinterpreted, right? And as a result, we weren't able to strive towards Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala with full energy, with full capacity. When someone doesn't know, for example, that there is a sunnah prayer before Fajr, let's just say someone didn't know that, right? And all these years they've been praying Fajr without praying that sunnah. They lost all of that. So they grieve over that. And with that concludes the station of huzn. And the next station is station of al-khawf, fear. Now, your generation and my generation to an extent, Islam was all about fear. Fear, be scared, etc. So let's try and, let's try and analyze. Let's try and understand what this means, khawf. Because if this goes out of proportion, it can create very, very toxic religion. It can create a toxic understanding of God and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala Himself. Sometimes you have these young youth. Why is God always threatening us? Why does God want us to fear Him and whatnot? Right? They have either been introduced to a very exaggerated understanding of fear, which distorts who Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is, as if He's like a dictator who's striking fear in our hearts to control us, and or they just simply don't understand the benefits of fear and how fear is healthy. That we as human beings, Allah created us with this emotion of fear. But fear is a very powerful tool, right? And it can also be a very controlling tool as well. So Ibn Qayyim rahmatullah alayhi says that fear, the station of fear, is among the most prominent and the most valuable stations for those who are seeking Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and is very healthy for the heart. And it is an obligation upon everyone. Meaning, in order to be a Muslim, you have to have an amount of fear of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. There has to be. It is simply irrational, and it's simply unplausible for someone to accept Islam without having an amount of fear of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Why? Because someone who accepts the need to worship God accepts it because they also accept the afterlife. They coincide, right? There's no point of accepting religion if there's no afterlife. In fact, there's no point of worshiping God if there's no afterlife, really, right? Unless it's for some like spiritual yoga type of experiences where I'm just doing this thing and, for a moment, it's more about pleasure and pleasure, finding pleasure in that moment than it is about a lifestyle, living life with a certain ideology. So in order to accept Allah, you accept the afterlife. And if you accept the afterlife, well, why do you accept it? Why do you worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? Why do you accept Allah as being the supreme God? Because, well, there's an amount of fear there. I'm afraid of the consequences. I'm afraid of the hellfire. Even if the person isn't practicing, there is still an amount of fear. Right? No Muslim, no matter how much of a drunkard they are, or they're doing drugs, or just doing the most indecent of acts, right? No Muslim would come out and say, hey, hellfire? Who cares about that? If they do say something like that, that's blasphemous in of itself. So every person, every believer has an amount of fear. Now, for some people, it's a little bit. Yeah, it's enough to keep them in the fold of Islam. And for other people, right, the fear that they have of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, there are stories of people literally fainting and dying because of fear of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Now, we'll get into it in a moment, but not all fear is healthy. Inshallah, we'll go over it. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, فَلَا تَخَافُوهُمْ وَخَافُونِ إِن كُنْتُم مُؤْمِنِينَ. Do not have fear of them, but rather fear me if you are truly believers. And in here is really the fundamental idea of fear and why it's so healthy for the heart. And that is, do not fear them, fear me. If our fear is exclusive to Allah, we won't fear anything else. And if we don't fear anything else, we become liberated from everything else. Fear, look at coronavirus right now. I've talked to some nurses, and there are some differing opinions as to what, but one thing that I think is clear is that the media is fear-mongering. They are fear-mongering the populations. Why? To get more viewers. That's what it is. For once, I think rightfully say that Trump isn't speaking dumb. Our president isn't speaking dumb when he says, you guys, there's no need to fear. I think he's actually right this time. And the news they're utilizing this. Why? To make money. Fear. Sometimes often dictators use fear to control people. Well, if our fear is in Allah alone, right, and a fear that's built on philosophies, where I fear Allah because He is in the highest authority, He controls everything, and therefore if any harm befalls me, that is by the permission of Allah. Right? As Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells Musa and Harun, قَالَ لَا تَخَافَا إِنَّنِي مَعَكُمَا أَسْمَعُ وَأَرَى. They told Allah, we fear Fir'aun. Right? We fear that he's going to kill us. And he's going to transgress against us. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala responds, don't fear. Don't have fear of him. Why? Because his forehead is in my hands. I control him. He cannot do anything without my permission. And the story of Musa is just an absolute amazing story in that regard. Musa ﷺ, his casket or the box that he was in, just mashallah, miraculously lands on the shore of Fir'aun's home. Right? And Fir'aun knows he's of the children of Israel. He looks different. If someone who's, in America, you could tell who's white and who's not white. It's quite obvious. The pharaohs, it seems like they were from Sudan, present-day Sudan. So they were of much darker skin. And the children of Israel, they look different. They're from a completely different region. So he knew. But despite that, he didn't harm him at all. Rather, he raised him. Or not, he was raised in his home. And Musa going directly addressing Fir'aun and calling him, you are wrong. You are a tyrant. You are this and you are that. Let children of Israel go. Despite that, Fir'aun didn't lay a finger on Musa alayhi salatu wasalam. Don't fear him, fear Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Don't fear anyone else, fear Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It liberates us from that. And therefore, people, when we do that, when our fear is exclusive to Allah, we liberate ourselves from the shackles, of all other people. They cannot use fear to control our emotions, to control our behavior. I fear Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. I mean, look at what's going on. It's quite amazing. Everyone you can't find paper tissue anywhere, right? Why? Because they're afraid. SubhanAllah. And Allah subhanahu also says, وَإِيَّايَ فَارْهَبُونَ, and have fear of me, only of me. فَلَا تَخْشَوُا النَّاسَ وَخْشَوْنِي, don't fear people, fear me. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala praises the people who have fear of Allah. إِنَّ الَّذِينَ هُمْ مِنْ خَشْيَةِ رَبِّهِمْ مُشْفِقُونَ. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala praises those who have khushu' of their Lord, right? And we'll get to, right? Aisha radiallahu anha, about this verse, she asks, Ya Rasulullah, are these the people who, they do major sins and they're afraid of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? The Prophet said, no, rather these are people who pray and they fast and they give charity. However, they're afraid that their acts, their good deeds aren't going to be accepted from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, or by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Right? So this is a healthy type of fear. That when a person does a good deed, they're like, oh, mashallah, I did this and I did that, I'm good, I'm set. Me and Allah, we're good. Right? Rather, they continue to worship Allah after doing the good deed by being concerned as to whether or not Allah accepted it. So what do they add to their act of worship? Another act of worship, that is, oh Allah, accept my good deeds. Right? The expressing the absolute weakness, their absolute helplessness in front of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. I did my good deed. Ya Allah, you have to accept this. If you don't accept it, then I'm done. And that's another element of worship that we add to our acts of worship. And Al-Hasan al-Basri rahimahullah ta'ala says, اعملوا والله بالطاعات واجتهدوا فيها وخافوا أن ترد عليهم إن المؤمن جمع إحسانا وخشية والمنافق جمع إساءة وأمنا. This is a beautiful saying. Hasan al-Basri rahimahullah ta'ala says that do good deeds, and by Allah, do obey Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and work hard in that, in obeying Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and worshipping Him. And be afraid that your actions will be rejected by Allah. Indeed, the believer combines ihsan, excellence, and fear of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Whereas the munafiq, the hypocrite, combines poor behavior with feeling secure. That I'm good. I'm good, I'm great, I'm doing well. SubhanAllah, someone who feels that way, they should be the most concerned. A believer, the more that they worship Allah, the more, kind of understand what's fueling this type of behavior. The more a person knows Allah, the more they realize how worthless their acts of worship are in comparison to what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala deserves. So the more they know Allah, the more they realize how little they have to offer, how helpless they are, and therefore they're afraid that their acts won't get accepted. Whereas the hypocrite who doesn't know Allah, who's disconnected from Allah, simply doesn't feel that. They think that, oh man, I'm so awesome, and whatever I do must be awesome, and here you go, Allah. They don't know Allah very much, so they don't realize what's befitting to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Abu al-Hafs rahimahullah ta'ala says, Al-khawfu sawtullahi yuqawwimu bihi ash-sharidin an babihi. He says that fear is the whip or the lash or the whip of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. He stabilizes, or he kind of disciplines those who have fallen off or have gone away from his door. Right? Meaning Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala strikes, there's a purpose behind fear. There's a goal trying to be accomplished through fear. And that is making sure people remain disciplined? Why do parents threaten to punish their kids? Why do governments say there are laws, if you break them, there are consequences? Because if you don't do that, everyone's going to go all out. That's just the reality. We've all seen the movies where the electricity goes out and it just riots and looting and raiding everywhere. Why? Because for those moments, the law is no longer applicable. So they go all out. And this is the reality. Why does Allah use fear? Why does He threaten us with hellfire? Why does He threaten us with punishment? If you do sins, there are negative consequences. So we don't do them, right? That's common sense. Everyone applies this. And this is what's meant by it. قال أبو سليمان ما فارق الخوف قلبا إلا خرب. Abu Sulaiman says that a heart that has lost the element of fear, that is no longer afraid, is a heart that has become wasted. It's a poisoned heart. Why? Because there's nothing going to discipline it. Why not do weed? Who cares? It's fun. Well, if you're not afraid of the negative consequences, the health issues that come about because of smoking weed, well, guess what's going to happen? They're just going to see the fun side of it, and they're going to do it. If someone ignores the health risks of drinking alcohol, they're going to drink alcohol. Right? And what was funny, once one guy told me that his daughter, until the age of 4, kept sucking her thumb. And they tried. Don't suck your thumb. Don't do it. She wouldn't listen. Until one day, she saw pictures of what happens to the teeth if someone continues to suck their thumb. And that hit her heart. Right? She's a 4-year-old girl. So she stopped doing it. He says that I started noticing her. She wants to suck her thumb and then she kind of stops. She remembers the pictures. Right? So fear is healthy when it's used in a healthy way, when it's understood what's the goal. When fear is used to discipline us, to keep us healthy, right, to keep us on track, that's good. I'm afraid of failing the course, therefore I'm going to do my homework. This is a healthy type of fear. Right? That's why there are grades, etc. قال إبراهيم ibn Sufyan said, إذا سكن الخوف القلوب أحرق مواضع الشهوات منها وطرد الدنيا عنها. It's another very beautiful statement. He says that when fear becomes part of the heart, it burns spiritual fear of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It burns one's desires. It overpowers desires. When my fear of Allah is stronger, it burns my desires. Even if the fear of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is a little bit weaker, it starts burning desires a little bit by bit. And the stronger a person's fear of Allah is, the more it burns it. Likewise, it expels this world, materialism, from the heart. If my fear is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, well, this is now a threat to me. All these pleasures of the life, life is deceptive. It's going to deceive me. It's going to take me away from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So the heart actively pushes it out. So fear creates a type of antibiotic, if that's the right word, in the heart. It fortifies the heart. It builds the immune system, where it becomes more and more immune to its desires and to materialism. And finally, the Nun says that الناس على الطريق ما لم يزل عنهم الخوف فإذا زال عنهم الخوف ضلوا الطريق. The Nun, who's another major spiritualist figure, he says that people will stay on the path, the straight path leading to Allah, so long as there is fear in their hearts. If that fear goes away, they will fall off the path. Again, this is another simple reality. Okay? And inshallah, in our next session, we will go over the types of fears, some of which we will go in more details. They have their own separate chapters. But inshallah, next week we'll go more into the concept of fear, to where we can understand it in a healthy manner, because this is one of the spiritual elements of our religion that I think has gone a little bit haywire in our times today. وصلى الله على نبينا محمد وعلى آله وأصحابه أجمعين.